Welcome to Module 1. Module 1 provides an overview of Yokefellow Prison Ministry. Topics covered in Module 1 include an overview of what the ministry does, a brief history of how the ministry got started, and an overview of the structure of the ministry. Let's start with a discussion of what the ministry does. On the screen, you can read the mission statement for Yokefellow Prison Ministry. Note that the mission of Yokefellow is different from what you may have seen through other Christian prison ministries, which tend to focus on holding worship services, leading Bible studies, or evangelizing inmates. While all of these activities have value, they fall outside the scope of what Yokefellow Prison Ministry was designed to do. Yokefellow's primary focus is building relationships with inmates and returning citizens to help them examine their lives, experience the healing power of God's love, and return to society transformed. What does this look like in practice? Take a look at the photograph on the screen, which was taken at a Yokefellow meeting in a prison. Notice that everyone is seated around small round tables with 1 or 2 Yokefellow volunteers seated with 2 to 4 inmates. Also, notice that they are engaged in small group discussions. By engaging in discussions, Yokefellow volunteers are building relationships with those they serve and communicating that the inmates or returning citizens are valued right where they are. Everyone is welcome to be served at a Yokefellow meeting. It's okay for inmates not to have a Christian faith or any faith at all. Even Satanists have attended Yokefellow meetings and later accepted Jesus as their Savior after being welcomed exactly as they are. Now let's take a look at the history of Yokefellow Prison Ministry. Yokefellow Prison Ministry was inspired by Quaker Elton Trueblood, who launched the Yokefellow movement in the 1940s. Dr. Trueblood was reading Matthew 11:28-30 on a train, which talks about Jesus' yoke being easy, when he had an inspiration centering on the image and function of a yoke. Just as oxen yoked together can accomplish more than a single animal, why can't Christians yoked together give added strength to the cause of Christ? The Yokefellow model was born with the simple idea of Christians being yoked together for fellowship, encouragement, and mutual support. So to support this model, Elton Trueblood also developed the 7 Yokefellow disciplines, which are identified on the next slide. This slide shows the 7 Yokefellow disciplines that Elton Trueblood identified and that all Yokefellow volunteers commit to practice. All of the disciplines are fundamental to the Christian faith. Yokefellow volunteers commit to pray every day, preferably at the beginning of the day. They seek God's guidance through reading the Bible every day. They participate in the public worship of God at least weekly. They return to God a definite portion of their income to support the Christian cause. They invest a specific amount of time in humble acts of love and service to others. They make an unapologetic witness of their faith in their daily life, work, and words. Finally, they become better informed Christians by the careful study of Christian books. The Yokefellow movement was applied to prison ministry in North Carolina after 3 pastors attended a Yokefellow retreat. They had a vision for how the Yokefellow model could help those in prison as they yoked together with community volunteers. The first Yokefellow meeting took place in a North Carolina prison in 1969. Yokefellow Prison Ministry of North Carolina Incorporated was later incorporated in 1972. Finally, let's take a look at the structure of Yokefellow Prison Ministry. This screen shows an organizational chart of the ministry's structure. The ministry is run by 15 to 24 members of the board of directors, all of whom are volunteers. The board is interdenominational and racially diverse and strives to have at least one ex-offender serving on the board at all times. Decisions made by the board are carried out by 2 paid staff. The executive director is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the ministry, including fundraising, marketing, and finances. The state developer is responsible for launching new Yokefellow ministries and supporting current ones. The state developer is the primary point of contact for local coordinators and for volunteers. Yokefellow's executive director is Vita Alligood. The state developer is Carlton Gooding. Both have been working for Yokefellow since October 2017. Each local Yokefellow ministry is headed by a volunteer local coordinator who serves as the liaison between the prison and volunteers, as well as between the volunteers and Yokefellow staff. If the local coordinator cannot answer a question or address an issue, Yokefellow staff is available to intervene. Thank you for viewing Module 1. You can review this video again and refer to the Volunteer Handbook to help you complete the test for this module.